The hammer fell with a crack that split the evening air, and Sheriff Colt Maverick's heart shattered alongside it. On the auction block stood Delilah Rosewater, her chin raised defiantly despite the iron shackles that bound her delicate wrists. The crowd of leering men pressed closer, their whispered bids rising like vultures circling carrion. $50, called out Jeremiah Thornwick, the town's most notorious brute, whose 3 previous wives had all mysteriously disappeared. Colt's jaw clenched. He'd watched this beautiful woman tend to sick children in the settlement for months, her gentle hands healing wounds that went deeper than flesh. Now she stood condemned for a crime he knew in his bones she hadn't committed, the supposed poisoning of wealthy merchant Augustus Grimwald, who'd been forcing himself on half the women in Willowbrook. 75. Another voice, this one belonging to Snake Eye Morton, a man whose cruelty was legend throughout the territory. The auctioneer. Old Benjamin Wheaton wiped tears from his weathered cheeks as he called for higher bids. Colt had known Benjamin since childhood. Man's conscience was eating him alive, but the law was the law. Debt bondage was legal. And Delilah's supposed victims' families demanded payment and servitude. Delilah's emerald eyes found Colt's across the crowd, and something electric passed between them. She'd nursed him back to health just 2 months ago, when outlaws had left him bleeding in the street. During those fever dream nights, she'd whispered stories of her childhood in Charleston, of dreams crushed by war and circumstance. He'd fallen in love with her voice first, then her laugh, then the way she hummed while grinding herbs for medicine. $100. The crowd turned to stare at Sheriff Maverick as he pushed through the throng, his silver badge catching the dying sunlight. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. What was their lawmen doing bidding on a convicted prisoner? Sheriff's got himself a fancy, someone snickered. Colt ignored them all, his steel blue eyes locked on Delilah's face. She'd gone pale, confusion flickering across her features. Did she think he was just another man seeking to own her body?
125,
Thornwick snarled, his scarred face twisting with rage. 200, Colt called out, his voice carrying the authority that had tamed this wild frontier town. The crowd fell silent. Auctioneer Wetton's voice cracked as he called for higher bids. But the sum was already more than most men saw in a year. Thornwick spat in the dirt and stalked away, muttering curses. Snake Eye Morton glared but said nothing even. He wouldn't dare cross the sheriff openly. $200 going once, ... going twice, ... Benjamin's hammer trembled in his arthritic hand. Sold to Sheriff Maverick. As the crowd dispersed, Colt approached the platform where Delilah still stood in chains. The key to her shackles felt like lead in his palm. When their eyes met again, hers brimmed with unshed tears, but whether from gratitude or fear, he couldn't tell. Come along, Miss Rosewater, he said gently, his voice betraying none of the storm raging in his chest. Let's get you home. But as he led her toward his modest cabin on the hill, both of them knew that nothing would ever be the same. The sun had set on her freedom, but perhaps, just perhaps it, was rising on something else entirely. The cabin. Door closed behind them with a soft thud that seemed to echo through Delilah's very soul. Sheriff Maverick moved to the fireplace, his broad shoulders tense beneath his worn leather vest. She remained by the door, still feeling the phantom weight of chains around her wrists. Why? She whispered, the single word carrying the weight of her confusion and fear. Why did you buy me? Colt turned slowly, his weathered hand still clutching the iron key that had freed her from the shackles. In the flickering lamplight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, because Thornwick would have broken you within a week, and Morton, ... double quotes, he couldn't finish the sentence.
Oh.
They both knew Morton's reputation with women. So you've saved me from wolves by claiming me for yourself? Delilah's voice carried a bitter edge. I'm still property, Sheriff. It's property with a kinder master. The word master hit Colt like a physical blow. He crossed the small room in 3 strides, stopping just close enough that she could smell the leather and gunpowder that seemed to cling to his skin. I am not your master, Delilah Rosewater. I never want to be any woman's master. Then what am I? She challenged, lifting her chin with the same defiance she'd shown on the auction block. What does $200 buy you in this territory? Colt's hand trembled as he reached up to touch her face, then stopped himself. "It buys you time," he said roughly. "Time for me to prove your innocence. Time for me to find the real killer. Before they strike again." Her emerald eyes widened. "You believe me? I've watched you heal half this town. I've seen you cry over injured animals. You couldn't poison a rat, let alone a man." His voice grew fierce. Augustus Grimwald had enemies lined up from here to Denver. Any one of them could have slipped. Nightshade into his whiskey.
Ow.
Delilah felt something crack open in her chest. Door she'd sealed shut the moment those accusations had been hurled at her. The town council, the judge, even my own neighbors. They all believed I was guilty. "Fear makes people stupid," Colt said simply. Grimwald owned half their mortgages. They needed someone to blame, someone who couldn't fight back. His jaw clenched. They picked the wrong woman. She studied his face in the amber light, searching for deception and finding none. "And if you can't prove my innocence, what then? I'll still be bound to you by law." "Then we'll leave," he said without hesitation. "It's California-Oregon territory, somewhere the law of Willowbrook can't touch us." Us. The word escaped as barely a breath. Colt's resolve crumbled. He'd tried to keep his distance during her trial, tried to remain the impartial lawman. But seeing her on that auction block, hearing those animals bid on her like she was livestock, had stripped away every pretense. "I've been half in love with you since the night you stitched up my gunshot wound, Delilah. When you sang that. Old hymn while you worked, when you made me drink your terrible willow bark tea." "It wasn't terrible," she protested, a ghost of a smile flickering across her lips. "It was awful," he countered, and for a moment they were just a man and woman sharing a joke. "Not a sheriff and his legal property, but I drank every drop because it came from your hands." The space between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Delilah took a half step forward, then stopped. "Colt, ... Even if you prove my innocence, I have nothing left. My medical practice, my reputation, my savings all gone. I can't even pay you back the $200. I don't want your money," he said fiercely. "I want your trust. I want the chance to court you properly, the way you deserve. Not as property, not as obligation, but as a woman free to choose her own path." Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Delilah shivered. Colt moved to bank the fire, giving her space to think. When he turned back, she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "1 month," she said finally. "Give me 1 month to prove my innocence. If we can't find the real killer by then, we will," Colt promised, his voice rough with emotion. "We will, Delilah. And when we do, I'm going to ask you properly, no chains, no debts, no obligations between us. It's just a man asking a woman if she'll have him. You're on." Grept through the cabin windows like a shy cat, and Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and cornbread. She'd slept in Colt's bed while he'd taken the floor. And guilt gnawed at her as she watched him move stiffly around the small kitchen, his back clearly aching from a night on hard boards. "I should have taken the floor," she said, wrapping his spare blanket around her shoulders like armor. "A gentleman doesn't let a lady sleep on the ground," Colt replied, not turning from the stove. "Coffee's almost ready." They ate in companionable silence. The morning light revealing details of his home she'd missed in the previous evening's lamplight, hand-carved furniture, books lined up carefully on rough-hewn shelves, a faded daguerreotype of a woman who shared. His strong jawline, his mother, perhaps. It was the home of a man who valued simple comforts and quiet moments. "Where do we start?" Delilah asked, setting down her tin cup. Colt pulled out a leather journal, its pages filled with his careful handwriting. "I've been investigating Grimwald's death since the night it happened. Official inquiry was closed too fast, but I kept digging on my own time." She leaned closer to look at his notes, caught his clean scent of soap and something uniquely masculine. "Focus," she told herself. "Your life depends on this." Grimwald had 3 business partners who were furious about his land speculation deals. Colt explained, pointing to names on his list. He'd also been blackmailing Judge Cornelius about some gambling debts, and there were rumors he'd gotten Preacher's daughter pregnant. Evangeline Sweetwater. Delilah's eyes widened. but she's barely 17. And her father, Reverend Josiah Sweetwater, owns a gun and has military training from his Confederate days. Colt's expression darkened. Then there's Dr. Aldrich Pemberton, who's been trying to establish his own practice here. Grimwald was blocking his licensing applications. Delilah felt a chill. She'd met Dr. Pemberton several times, a nervous, thin man with ink-stained fingers and a tendency to sweat even in cool weather. Pemberton would know about poisons. He'd know exactly how much nightshade would kill a man. Grimwald sighs. My thought exactly. Colt closed the journal. Problem is, gathering evidence without tipping off the real killer. Everyone in town thinks the case is closed. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Colt's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he approached the window. It's Martha Henley, he said, surprised. Martha ran the town's general store and had been one of the few people to speak kindly of Delilah during the trial. When Colt opened the door, the middle-aged woman pushed past him, her face flushed with exertion and fear. Sheriff, thank the Lord you're here. There's been another death. Delilah's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor. Another poisoning? Dr. Pemberton, Martha gasped, clutching her chest. Found him this morning in his office, dead as a doornail. And Sheriff, ... Her voice dropped to a whisper. He left a note, confessing to killing Augustus Grimwald. Cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Colt and Delilah exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. This was either the break they'd prayed for, or a trap that would destroy them both. How convenient, Colt said slowly. The real killer confesses just as I'm investigating other suspects. Martha's eyes darted between them. You think someone else killed Pemberton? Made it look like suicide? I think, Colt said, strapping on his gun belt, that someone in this town is very smart and very dangerous. And they just made their first mistake. He turned to Delilah, his blue eyes intense. I need you to stay here. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in, except me. No, she stood, her spine straight with determination. If someone killed Pemberton, to frame him for Grimwald's murder, they're not finished. They'll come for me next, the convenient scapegoat who's already been convicted. I'm safer with you than hiding here alone. Colt wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. More than that, he could see the fire in her eyes, the same courage that had carried her. Through months of false accusations and public shame, she was right. They were stronger together. Then we do this as partners, he said. But Delilah, if this goes bad, if we don't make it out? She crossed to him, her hand finding his cheek. Then at least we'll face it together. No chains, no obligations. Just choice. He covered her hand with his own, memorizing the feel of her skin. Outside, Willowbrook was waking up to news of another death. And somewhere in their peaceful frontier town, killer was watching and waiting. The hunt for truth was about to become deadly. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrooks. Main Street, as Colt and Delilah approached Dr. Pemberton's office, a small crowd had gathered. Their voices hushed, but excited death was always entertainment in a frontier town starved for stimulation. Move along, folks, Colt called out with practiced authority. Nothing to see here. But Delilah noticed how their eyes followed her, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. The convicted poisoner walking free beside their sheriff. She lifted her chin and ignored them, though her stomach churned with each stare. Inside Pemberton's cramped office, the scene was almost theatrically arranged. The thin doctor slumped over his desk, a half-empty bottle of laudanum beside his pale hand. A sheet of paper lay beneath his fingers, covered in shaky handwriting that supposedly confessed to murdering Augustus Grimwald out of professional jealousy. 2. Neat, Colt muttered, pulling on leather gloves to examine the body. Look at his fingernails. Delilah, what do you see? She leaned closer, her healer's training overriding her revulsion.
Ow.
They're clean. To clean. If he'd been mixing laudanum or handling bottles, there would be residue, stains, ... and the handwriting. Colt held up the confession letter. I've seen Pemberton's prescription notes. His penmanship was precise, controlled. This looks like someone trying to copy his style while under stress. A shadow fell across the doorway. Judge Cornelius Blackthorne filled the frame, his massive bulk blocking the morning light. Behind him stood Mayor Fitzpatrick and two members of the town council, all men who'd rushed to convict Delilah mere days ago. Sheriff Maverick, the judge rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years on the bench. I trust this tragic suicide puts an end to any unofficial investigations you might have been conducting. The way he emphasized unofficial made Colt's jaw clench. Funny thing about suicide, Judge, usually leaves more questions than answers. Not this time. Mayor Fitzpatrick stepped forward, his thin mustache twitching nervously. Dr. Pemberton's confession clears up everything. Poor man couldn't live with the guilt. Case closed, justice served. Justice. Delilah's voice cut through. The stuffy air, like a blade. An innocent woman was sold like cattle yesterday because you were all too eager to find someone to blame. And now a man is dead, possibly murdered, and you want to close the case again? Judge Blackthorne's small eyes narrowed. You forget yourself, girl. You're still bound by law to Sheriff Maverick. I suggest you remember your place. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Colt stepped between Delilah and the judge, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Miss Rosewater is under my protection. Anyone who threatens her, threatens me. Careful, Sheriff, the judge warned. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment. The good people of Willowbrook need closure, not more investigation. After the officials left, Colt and Delilah continued their examination of the scene. In Pemberton's medical bag, Delilah found something that made her blood run cold. A small vial labeled atropine extract, nearly empty. Nightshade derivative, she whispered. But Colt, this isn't what killed Grimwald. This is pure extract, concentrated. It would work too fast, cause seizures and foaming at the mouth. Grimwald died peacefully in his sleep, remember? The killer used something else. So either Pemberton was experimenting with different poisons, Colt mused, or someone planted. This to support the suicide story. Soft knock made them both turn. Evangeline Sweetwater stood in the doorway, her young face streaked with tears. The preacher's daughter was barely 17, but pregnancy had already begun to show in the fullness of her face and the strain around her eyes. Sheriff Maverick, I need to tell you something. About Mr. Grimwald. About what really happened. Delilah moved to the girl, instinctively protective. Evangeline, honey, what is it? The night he died, Mr. Grimwald came to our house. Daddy was at evening service, and Mama was visiting her sister in Riverside. He said he wanted to discuss my condition, make arrangements. The girl's voice broke, but he wasn't there to help. He wanted to do things to me again, said the baby proved I was willing. Colt's fists clenched. What happened then? I had Mama's sleeping powder, the one Dr. Pemberton made for her nerves. I put it in his whiskey, just wanting him to leave me alone. But he kept drinking, kept demanding, ... double quotes, she sobbed. I gave him more and more until he finally passed out on our settee. Daddy came home and found him there, and your father, Delilah, asked gently. Daddy carried him outside, left him by his horse. Said the devil could take care of his own, we thought. We thought he'd just wake up with a terrible headache. We never meant for him to die. The pieces clicked into place in Colt's mind. Someone saw your father carrying Grimwald. It's someone who decided to use that information to frame an innocent woman rather than expose a desperate girl and her protective father. But who? Delilah asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Through the window, they could see Judge Blackthorne talking intently with Mayor Fitzpatrick outside the saloon, but it wasn't their conversation that caught Colt's attention, it was the way. Fitzpatrick kept glancing toward the doctor's office, his thin face twisted with something that looked like fear. Evangeline, Colt said urgently, I need you to think. Carefully. The sleeping powder your mother uses, who else knows about it? Well, Dr. Pemberton prescribed it, of course, and... Her eyes widened with realization. Mayor Fitzpatrick. He came by last month asking about it, said his wife needed something similar for her nerves. The hunt was narrowing. Their prey was growing desperate. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place like autumn leaves, but Colt knew they needed ironclad proof before confronting anyone. As evening approached, he and Delilah made their way to the town records office, where dusty ledgers held the financial secrets of Willowbrook's most prominent citizens. If Fitzpatrick killed Grimwald and framed you, there has to be a motive beyond just knowing about sleeping powder, Colt reasoned. Lighting a kerosene lamp as darkness crept through the windows, Delilah pulled out a thick ledger marked municipal, bonds, and investments. Her fingers traced down columns of numbers. Her healer's precision now focused on financial diagnoses. Here, she said suddenly, Fitzpatrick borrowed heavily from Grimwald last year to invest in a railroad spur that was supposed to come through Willowbrook. Let me guess, the railroad changed its route. Worse, according to this, the whole project was a confidence scheme. Fitzpatrick lost everything, including money that belonged to the town treasury. She looked up, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. He embezzled municipal funds to cover his gambling with Grimwald's money. So when the railroad scheme collapsed, Fitzpatrick owed Grimwald a fortune he couldn't pay back. Colt felt the familiar satisfaction of a case coming together. Grimwald probably threatened to expose the embezzlement, which would mean prison, disgrace, ruin. Delilah closed the ledger with a soft thud. Plenty of motive for murder. A board creaked in the hallway outside, and they both froze. Colt's hand moved to his gun as footsteps approached, too heavy to be Evangeline, too stealthy to be casual. The door exploded inward, and Mayor Fitzpatrick stumbled inside, a shotgun trembling in his manicured hands. His usual composure had cracked, revealing the desperate animal beneath. "I knew you wouldn't let it alone," he gasped, sweat beading on his pale forehead despite the cool evening air. "Had to keep digging, didn't you, Maverick?" "Easy, Harold," Colt said, slowly raising his hands. "Nobody needs to get hurt here." "Hurt?" Fitzpatrick laughed, a high, brittle sound. "I'm already ruined. When that confession letter fails to satisfy people, when they start asking questions about Pemberton's death, I'll hang for sure." "You killed Dr. Pemberton," Delilah said, her voice steady, despite the gun pointed at her chest. "Made it look like suicide to close the case. Poor Aldrich. So nervous, so eager to please. I told him I had evidence that would clear your name. Asked him to meet me at his office after dark." Fitzpatrick's finger twitched on the trigger. "Actually thanked me as I forced the laudanum down his throat. Thanked me for finally doing the right thing." "And the confession letter?" "Practice. Lots of practice copying his handwriting from prescription bottles. Amazing what pressure can make a man learn to do." Colt shifted slightly, trying to get between Delilah and the gun. "What's your plan now, Harold? Kill us both? That'll just bring more questions." "Murder-suicide," Fitzpatrick said, gaining confidence in his desperation. The sheriff and his purchased woman, overcome with guilt and passion, very romantic, very tragic. "The town will eat it up, except for one problem," Delilah said calmly. "You're forgetting about Evangeline Sweetwater." Fitzpatrick's eyes narrowed. "What about the preacher's brat? She told us everything this afternoon? About her father carrying an unconscious Grimwald out of their house, about the sleeping powder that was meant to stop his advances, but accidentally killed him." Delilah took a small step forward. "We know you saw Reverend Sweetwater that night. You realized what had happened and decided to use it to your advantage. I saved that girl from scandal," Fitzpatrick snarled. "The whole family would have been ruined if the truth came out." "So you destroyed an innocent woman instead," Colt said, his voice hard as granite. "Sold Delilah into bondage to protect your own skin. She was nobody, spinster healer with no family, no connections, perfect to take the blame." Fitzpatrick's hands shook harder. "You had to complicate things, didn't you? Had to play the knight in shining armor." The shotgun swung toward Colt, and in that instant, Delilah moved. Years of working with sick and delirious patients had taught her to read the moment when control snapped. She threw herself sideways, knocking over the kerosene lamp as Colt drew his pistol. The office exploded into chaos, breaking glass. Spilled oil igniting into sudden flame, the roar of gunshots in the confined space. Fitzpatrick's first barrel went wide, blasting a hole in the wall where Colt's head had been a heartbeat before. The second barrel discharged into the ceiling as Colt's bullet took the mayor's center mass. Fitzpatrick dropped like a marionette with cut strings. Shotgun clattering across the wooden floor. Fire was already spreading from the broken lamp, and smoke filled the small space. "Delilah," Colt called out, coughing as he searched through the haze. Here she emerged from behind an overturned desk, soot-stained but unharmed. "Is he?" Colt knelt beside Fitzpatrick, checking for a pulse and finding none. "It's over," he said simply. Outside, shouts echoed through the night as people responded to the gunshots and the orange glow beginning to show through the windows. Soon, the entire town would know the truth about Augustus Grimwald's death, about Dr. Pemberton's murder, about the mayor who'd rather kill than face justice. But for now, in the growing firelight, Colt reached for Delilah's hand and found it waiting. For his, the trial lasted 3 days, though everyone knew the outcome from the first testimony. Evangeline Sweetwater's confession about her father's involvement in Grimwald's accidental death painted a picture far different from the cold-blooded poisoning Delilah had been accused of. Reverend Josiah Sweetwater stood beside his daughter, his weathered face full of shame and relief as he admitted to carrying the unconscious Grimwald away from their home. "I thought I was protecting my child," the preacher said, his voice carrying across the packed courtroom. "I never imagined someone would use our family's tragedy to destroy an innocent woman." Judge Blackthorne, clearly uncomfortable with how quickly the truth had unraveled his previous judgment, declared Delilah's conviction null and void. "Miss Rosewater, this court apologizes for the grievous error in justice. You are hereby cleared of all charges and restored to full citizenship." The crowd murmured, some with satisfaction at seeing justice served, others with embarrassment at how eagerly they'd accepted her guilt. Delilah sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her green eyes dry despite the tears she felt building. Inside, vindication was sweet, but it couldn't erase the memory of standing on that auction block, couldn't undo the humiliation of being sold like livestock. After the formal proceedings ended, townspeople approached with awkward apologies and offers to restore her medical practice. Mrs. Henley brought a basket of preserves. Old Benjamin Wheaton, the auctioneer who'd wept while selling her, pressed a small bag of coins into her hands. "Your fee, from all the folks you've doctored over the years," he said gruffly. "We collected it up after we realized how wrong we'd been." But it was the conversation with Dr. Thaddeus Morrison that surprised her most. The elderly physician had arrived from Denver just as the trial concluded. Having heard about the deaths and the scandal surrounding Willowbrook's medical community, "I've been looking for an associate," he told Delilah as they walked through the town cemetery where both Grimwald and Fitzpatrick now lay buried. "Someone with real healing talent, not just book learning. The folks here speak highly of your skills." "They didn't speak highly of my character," Delilah replied with a bitter smile. "Fear makes people cruel," Dr. Morrison said gently. "But healing makes them grateful. Stay in Willowbrook, Miss Rosewater. Let them make amends through their trust in your medicine." That evening, as autumn painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah found herself back at Colt's cabin. She'd been staying at the boarding house since the trial ended, trying to rebuild some sense of normalcy, but they'd fallen into the habit of sharing supper and conversation as the days grew shorter. "Dr. Morrison offered me a partnership," she said, watching Colt tend to his horse in the small stable behind the cabin. "Good money, steady work, a chance to really help people." Colt's hand stilled on the horse's flank. "That's wonderful, Delilah. You deserve every opportunity to use your gifts." She heard the careful neutrality in his voice and smiled. "He wants me to establish a clinic here in Willowbrook. Says the town needs to heal from what happened, and having me stay would show real progress." "And what do you want?" Colt asked, finally turning to face her. The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. They'd been dancing around their feelings since that first morning in his cabin, both afraid to presume too much after everything she'd endured. "I want," she said slowly, "to know if a certain sheriff meant what he said about courting me properly. No debts, no obligations, just a man asking a woman if she'll have him." Colt set down the curry brush and stepped closer, his blue eyes intense. "In the fading light, I meant every word. But Delilah, I need you to know, I'm not asking because I bought you, not because you owe me anything. I'm asking because I love you, because you're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known. Even after everything, even knowing I'll always be the woman who was sold at auction, you'll be the woman who survived it, he said fiercely. The woman who fought for truth when everyone else accepted lies. The woman who chose love over bitterness. He reached for her hands, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. Marry me, Delilah Rosewater. Not because law says you belong to me, but because I want to belong to you. The tears she'd held back during the trial finally came, not from sorrow, but from joy so pure it felt like physical pain. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Colt Maverick. Yes to marriage, yes to staying in Willowbrook, yes to building something beautiful from all this ugliness. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around as the first stars appeared overhead. When he set her down, she was laughing through her tears, her face tilted up to catch the last light of sunset. We'll have to face questions, she said practically. People will always wonder if our feelings are real or just born from circumstances. Let them wonder, Colt replied, pulling her close. We'll know the truth, maybe someday our children. We'll hear the story of how their parents found love in the darkest hour and chose to trust it. Spring arrived early in Willowbrook, bringing with it the wedding of Sheriff Colt Maverick and Dr. Delilah Rosewater. The ceremony took place in the town square, on the very spot where the auction block had stood just 6 months earlier. It was Delilah's idea. She wanted to replace that memory with something beautiful. Reverend Sweetwater performed the service. His daughter Evangeline beside him as a witness, her baby boy sleeping peacefully in her arms. The child had been born healthy and strong, and no one in town spoke any more of his parentage. Some secrets were better left buried with the dead. Dr. Morrison had indeed established a clinic, and Delilah's partnership with him had brought healing to Willowbrook in more ways than one. People who'd shunned her during the trial now trusted her with their lives, her children, their deepest fears about illness and mortality. She'd delivered babies, set broken bones, and sat vigil with the dying, earning back her place in the community through acts of mercy rather than words of forgiveness. The wedding feast was held at the newly expanded boarding house, where Mrs. Henley had insisted on preparing a banquet that would be remembered for years. Even old Benjamin Wheaton had contributed, his fiddle providing music that echoed off the surrounding hills. As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Colt and Delilah found themselves walking hand in hand toward their new home, a house they'd built together on the hill overlooking the valley. It was larger than Colt's old cabin, with space for the children they hoped to have, and a proper medical office where Delilah could tend to patients. Any regrets? Colt asked as they paused to look back at the town lights twinkling below. Delilah considered the question seriously. About marrying you? Never. About staying in Willowbrook, after everything that happened here. She was quiet for a moment. I thought I'd want to leave, start fresh somewhere. No one knew our story. But this place shaped us, Colt. The good and the bad, the fear and the courage, it all led us to each other. And now we shape it in return. Evangeline's little boy will grow up in a town where his mother is respected, not shamed. Other women will know they can speak up when men try to force themselves on them. And maybe she smiled, pressing a hand to her still flat stomach. Our children will grow up knowing their parents fought for truth and won. Colt's eyes widened. Delilah, are you? Too early to be certain, she said, laughing at his expression. But Dr. Morrison thinks it's likely. Apparently, love is an excellent cure for the stress that was preventing conception. He spun her around again, just as he had that first evening when she'd agreed to marry him, but this time with the solid foundation of months of courtship shared. Dreams and the deep trust that comes from weathering storms together inside their new home. Colt lit the lamps, while Delilah changed from her wedding dress into the simple cotton gown he'd grown to love during their courtship. When she emerged from the bedroom, her hair loose around her shoulders, he was standing by the window looking out at the stars. What are you thinking about? She asked, moving to stand beside him. That day at the auction, he said quietly. Keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't had the money to bid. Delilah slipped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his broad back. But you were there. You did have the money. And more importantly, you had the courage to act when everyone else stood by and watched. I was terrified, he admitted. Terrified I was overstepping. Terrified you'd see me as just another man trying to own you. You know what I saw? She turned him to face her, her green eyes serious in the lamplight. I saw a man willing to risk everything to save someone he barely knew. I saw honor when everyone else showed cowardice. I knew you, Delilah. Maybe not all your stories, maybe not your favorite songs or the way you laugh when you're truly happy, but I knew your heart. I'd seen it in action too many times to doubt it. She stood on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. And now you'll have a lifetime to learn the rest. Later, as they lay in their marriage bed with moonlight streaming through the windows they'd positioned to catch the morning sun, Delilah traced patterns on Colt's chest with her fingertip. I have a confession, she said softly. Oh, his voice was drowsy with contentment. That night you bought me. When we were talking by the fire and you said you'd been half in love with me since I stitched your wound, I was already completely in love with you. Colt's eyes opened, suddenly alert. What, you were delirious with fever for 3 days? You kept calling for your mother, apologizing for things that weren't your fault, worrying about the town even while you were dying? She smiled at the memory. And when you finally woke up, the first thing you asked was whether the merchant's little girl had recovered from her pneumonia. Not about your own injuries, not about who shot you, about a sick child you'd helped me carry to safety 2 weeks earlier. Why didn't you tell me? Because a woman sold at auction can't trust her own feelings. I needed to know our love was real, not born from gratitude or desperation or the strange intimacy of crisis. She kissed his collarbone, tasting salt and something uniquely him. But it is real, isn't it? What we have, real as sunrise? He murmured, pulling her closer. Real as the mountains, as the rivers that carve them. Real as the choice we make every day to love each other despite everything that tried to tear us apart. Outside their window, Willowbrook slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. In the cemetery, Fitzpatrick's grave lay unmarked, except for a simple wooden cross, his schemes and cruelties already fading from memory during community gatherings. But nearby, Dr. Pemberton's grave was tended by grateful patients who remembered his gentle care. Even as they mourned his tragic death, the town had learned hard lessons about rushing to judgment, about the difference between justice and vengeance. Children born that spring would grow up in a place marked by both its failures and its redemption, where a sheriff and a healer had proven that love could triumph over fear as dawn approached. Painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold, Delilah felt the child she suspected she carried, their first son, who would one day wear his father's badge and heal his community with his mother's wisdom. But that was still months away, still part of a future they would build together one day at a time. For now, it was enough to lie in her husband's arms, to feel his steady heartbeat against her cheek, to know that she was no longer property to be bought and sold, but a woman who had chosen her own destiny. The auctioneer's hammer had fallen at sunset 6 months ago. At their true story, the story of Sheriff Colt Maverick and Dr. Delilah Maverick, was just beginning. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, calling the faithful to morning prayer. But Colt and Delilah had already found their heaven, built not on clouds and golden streets, but on trust, courage, and the revolutionary act of loving someone exactly as they are. The sun rose over Willowbrook, and all was well.